Can Zhen Huan, blessed with both beauty and talent, truly outshine all in the imperial harem and enjoy everlasting favor? As everyone saw that the event had concluded, they all retreated. Lu Zhu had disappeared at some point, leaving only Emperor Xianling and me. I felt a slight panic, and the warm breeze blew the stray hairs by my temples onto my face, tickling me in waves. The Emperor held my hand and walked silently forward, the soft grass beneath our feet making a subtle rustling sound, blending with the swish of our garments. His hand was slightly warm, and I could feel the distinct lines of his palm. I didn't dare to pull away. My face felt as if it was burning up, and all I could do was walk quietly with my head down. Looking down, I saw a pair of soft satin embroidered shoes at my feet, a cherished item I had embroidered in my leisure time. The very light mercury white interspersed with the rose-purple threads of spring silkworms formed the delicate and thin petals of begonia flowers, resembling the fragile heart I had just begun to understand the world with. On the tip of the shoe, a pair of butterflies embroidered to appear as if flying side by side, their antennae adorned with small round silver beads. With each step on the fresh green grass, there was a faint tinkling sound, as if lotus flowers were blooming with every step. The butterflies seemed to flutter in my heart, causing it to beat erratically. The walk to the nearby Jilin Pavilion felt like a long and winding mountain path, even though it was only a few dozen steps, leaving my legs feeling weak and sore. Upon entering the pavilion, the Emperor slightly loosened his grip, and I immediately withdrew my hand, feeling a layer of sticky moisture on my palm and fingers. He stood in front of me with his hands behind his back and said softly, "That day when it rained heavily, I didn't intentionally break our appointment." I didn't dare to respond, but not answering the Emperor would be disrespectful, so I quietly replied with a soft yes. He continued, "I had already arrived at the Shangling Garden that day, but the Empress Dowager suddenly summoned me to the Empress's palace, and I had to rush over, which resulted in me getting caught in the rain and catching a cold for a few days." Hearing this, I panicked, knowing well that he had recovered and was standing right in front of me, yet I couldn't help blurting out, "Your Majesty, are you feeling better now?" After saying it, I realized how foolish my question was and felt embarrassed, causing my face to redden as I whispered, "I am foolish." He smiled gently and said, "Later I thought about it. The rain was so heavy that day, and since you were resting, you would not have come out." My voice was barely audible. I did not break our appointment. His eyes lit up with joy and he asked, "Really? Did you get caught in the rain? Did it hurt you?" His question filled me with both tears and joy, as if the days of gloom and melancholy had dissipated like dense fog meeting sunlight, and I replied, "Thank you for your concern, Your Majesty. I did not get wet in the rain. I am fine." My head was almost bowed to my chest, and the sparse embroidered pattern on my chest scratched my chin slightly. He wore a highly transparent jade ring on the thumb of his right hand, which looked like a tranquil pool of water. He lifted my chin with his 4 fingers, forcing me to look up. His gaze was clear and direct, almost unfathomably deep, reflecting only my figure and the splendidly blooming apricot flowers behind me. My heart raced and I felt the flush of color spreading to my cheeks, making me whisper involuntarily, "How could Your Majesty deceive me?" His smile deepened. "If I had told you early on, you would have been as constrained by my identity as the other concubines. How then could you freely enjoy music and admire flowers with me, being so at ease?" I lowered my eyelids to look at the embroidered shoes and said, "Your Majesty is teasing me, wanting to see me make a fool of myself by being ignorant of the proper etiquette." The Emperor laughed heartily for a while before gradually calming down and said, "If I had revealed it from the start, you would only fear me, flatter me, which wouldn't be the real you." He then turned to lean on the vermilion pavilion railing, gazing into the distance as if to see through the layers of floral shadows to the depths of the sky. "I value you for your true nature. If you were no different from the other concubines, I wouldn't care so much about our appointment." I lowered my head to look at the crimson corner of his robe, densely embroidered with black silk threads forming continuous coué patterns. With flushed face and ears, I replied, "Yes." Then I added, "I am foolish and didn't notice at all." The Emperor was slightly proud. "I intentionally kept it from you. How could you have known? It's just that my 6th brother has often been summoned to the palace and confined by me." I slightly bent my knees. Your Majesty is insightful and a rare genius. How could I possibly understand? Suddenly he reached out and held my hand, asking, "Why are your hands so cold? Is it because you've been out in the wind?" I hurriedly said, "I am not cold." He hummed, "You've been out for a while. I'll accompany you back." I was about to say, "I dare not," when he suddenly swept me up in his arms. I let out a soft cry of surprise and instinctively wrapped my arms around his neck. My long, soft skirt trailed behind like the wings of a fluttering butterfly, stunningly bright for a moment. He laughed. "Walking is tiring, I'll carry you." I was greatly alarmed yet dared not struggle, only saying, "This could lead to criticism and gossip about your Majesty. I would never dare." The Emperor smiled and said, "I care for the concubine I favor. Let others gossip as they will." His face flashed a mischievous smile. "After all, this isn't the first time I've carried you." I was too embarrassed to speak further and could only comply, curling up in Xianling's arms, letting him carry me back to the palace. Being so close to him, pressed against his chest, I could faintly sense a strange fragrance about him. Though very subtle, it seemed to emanate from deep within, bringing a pleasant joy. He was dressed in a red brocade robe with wide sleeves, and my lake blue dress was gently lifted by the wind of the long streets, the light green ribbons on the dress softly brushing against Xianling's clothes, silent and soft. Along the way, eunuchs and palace maids who saw us bowed in haste, respectfully calling out, "Long live the Emperor," and lowering their heads, daring not to look, yet sneaking glances. Xianling's steps were unhurried, and in the wind, the faint sound of my hairpins rings gently clinking could be heard, tinkling all the way. Tongli Palace, which had never been entered by any man other than the imperial physician since I moved in, took on an extraordinary significance with the arrival of Emperor Xianling. When the Emperor carried me into this usually tightly closed palace, all the eunuchs and palace maids who were tidying up the courtyard were startled, kneeling down in surprise and joy to greet us. Clearly, Lu Zhu had already informed everyone of my promotion to concubine, but no one expected me to return in such an unexpected manner. Suddenly seeing those familiar faces made me both embarrassed and shy. I gently struggled, but the Emperor didn't put me down or even glance at them, simply saying, "Get up," and carried me straight into Inkson Hall before setting me down. The Emperor glanced at the line of palace servants who had followed in and stood before us with bowed heads and hands, and asked indifferently, "Were these the only people serving you when you became a noble?" I respectfully replied, "I needed to recuperate in quiet, and there really was no need for so many servants. That's not proper. Who is the chief eunuch and the head palace maid here?" Jinshi knelt down and said, "This servant, Cui Jinshi, a 7th rank attendant in charge of Tongli Palace, greets your Majesty. To report to your Majesty, there is no chief eunuch in Tongli Palace." The Emperor showed a hint of confusion, and Jinshi explained, "Originally, Kong Lu Hai was the chief eunuch here, but he was taken by Consort Li to serve elsewhere." The Emperor's expression darkened slightly, then he calmed down and said, "That's a minor issue." He then said to me, "It's not acceptable for your palace to be without a chief eunuch. Tomorrow, I will have the Internal Affairs Department select a few experienced eunuchs, and you can choose one to manage your palace." I smiled and said, "There's no need for such trouble. Why not let Xiao Yunzi, who is already in my palace, take on this responsibility for now? I think he's quite capable, let him gain some experience." Xiao Yunzi immediately bowed down cleverly and said, "This servant thanks His Majesty for his grace and the young mistress for her recognition. I will do my utmost to serve well." The Emperor smiled at me and said, "If you say he's good, then he's good. It saves the trouble of bringing someone from outside who might not understand your temperament." Then to Xiao Yunzi he said, "Your young mistress appreciates you and gives you face, so you must do your job well and not cause her any trouble." Xiao Yunzi quickly kowtowed 3 times, saying loudly, "Yes, this servant obeys." The Emperor said, "Now that you've been promoted to concubine, you should have a few more people. Tomorrow, I'll have the Internal Affairs Department select some people to come in, pick a few good ones to serve in the palace." I smiled and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty. I will leave it to Your Majesty's discretion." The Emperor kindly said, "Rest early and take good care of yourself. I will come to see you again in a few days." I followed him to the palace gate, where a bright yellow sedan chair was already waiting outside, surrounded by dozens of palace maids, eunuchs, and imperial guards standing like statues. When the emperor came out, they all knelt down to bid farewell, and I respectfully said, "I respectfully see off His Majesty." Watching the group slowly leave, with the bright yellow fading into the distance, I then returned to the hall.
Follow us to avoid getting lost and enjoy endless exciting stories. For more content, please go to the Story Wall homepage to view more exciting novels.